Good morning. My name is Beth Cannell. I'm a writer in Vermont in the Northeast Kingdom, and I wanted to talk to you today about living to write and writing to live. I basically live to write. My screen name is frequently Beth Poet, and that says everything about me. Poetry's been the most important part of my life since I was a kid. I always wanted to write novels and stories, and I didn't think I was very good at them. So I stuck with the poetry. And when I was in my mid-20s, I discovered I'm really good at nonfiction. The way I discovered it was, first of all, by the fact that everybody needs an income when you're not living with your parents anymore. And the easiest income for a writer is in journalism. That is working for a newspaper or something similar to it, like an online news service, a radio station, TV station, research for one of those, articles for online websites. All of those need material every day. So they hire pretty often. They don't always pay well, but they pay enough to get by on. And that's all I needed. I'm lucky that way. I have a good education, and mine happens to be in the sciences. That's a whole other story as to why that happened, but it's worked really well for me to have that balance of sciences and wanting to be writing. So I started working for the Newport paper when I was 25, and then worked for the Chronicle in Barton, and worked for the Caledonian Record in St. Johnsbury. And while I was doing that, all of those were, except for the Newport paper, those were mostly freelance work. Freelance work is when somebody gives you an assignment and you complete it and they pay you just for that assignment. Employment on a daily basis is where you kind of are contracted to a particular employer and they give you the same amount every week, and you can rely on it. And that usually comes with things like health insurance, which otherwise is pretty expensive if you're just freelancing. So I found that journalism, or some form of journalism, is a really good background for writing for me. The other thing that I've done that has kept the bills paid for me is I've used my chemistry degree. I edit material for chemistry journals, and a journal is a sophisticated way of saying a magazine for material that's research, that's a careful report in the sciences, things like that. And that pays really well compared to all the other jobs available to do as a freelancer. But what about the things I love to do? Well, that's the poetry, that's the novels, that's the short stories, that's even the memoirs at this point. And it's really, really important to me to do that. So what I need to do in each day is kind of divide my effort between the things that I want to do and the things that I need to do. I try to do a little bit of paid work every day and a little bit of risk-taking every day. So for me, risk-taking as a writer is writing something that I don't know whether I'm going to get paid for it or not, but I want to write it. There are big reasons in my life that I want to write it. Sometimes it's because I'm in love with Vermont or with a character, a plot, a situation. Sometimes it's because I just want to have fun with something. What has become my special niche is writing about teenagers in Vermont at different times in history. And I should show you some of the things I've written. Well, actually, you're looking at my writing space right now. And in the background, you can see shelves of references and things that are involved with the projects I'm working on. And the first nonfiction book I wrote was one, well, my second nonfiction book, but the first one that came out under my name and was published is this one. It's an adventure guide to Vermont, and I wrote it in the 1980s. It didn't pay very well, but it paid something, and it got me published with my name on a cover, and I was thrilled. I really was. Then I began to write these books that take place in Vermont that involve teenagers. Why teenagers? Because inside me is a teenager. I'm proud. I don't look like one anymore, but there's a piece of me that's really important that kind of came into being in my teen years. And I'm assuming it's the same for you, that the person you are now is really critical to who you're always going to be. You're always going to remember who you are now and the experiences you have now. And they're going to shape you and shape the things that you write. So are the other ones, but these are the experiences that you're having right now and that you've already had. And they're actually critical to how you're going to write. They're wonderful things to have experienced. So don't ever put your life down from having been here in the Northeast Kingdom, for having not had bigger adventures. The adventures you're having now are the ones you're going to be relying on forever. And they're going to be so cool as you look back to them. But how do we get there? Well, okay, so we start writing about other things maybe. For instance, I wrote this book, The Darkness Under the Water. It's set in Waterford, Vermont in 1930. And it was really, really important to me to talk about the history of that time, to get it into the story. But I also found myself writing about what it is to be 15 and not sure that you want to be like your parents or your grandparents, and how you make your own choices about that. And you'll find as you read it that there's a house fire in it. Turns out there's a house fire in almost everything I write these days, because one of the big shaping events of my life was a house fire I went through. Don't want to talk about it in person right now, but it does keep cropping up, and I'm okay with that. But I really, really wanted to talk in that book about what it's like to make your own choices, to realize that you can make your own choices. And that's what got me into writing what's now called YA, young adult books. So I also wrote The Secret Room, which is set in North Danville. And most importantly at the moment, The Longshadow. Now this is also set in North Danville, but it's set in the years before the Civil War. It begins in 1850, and it's now part of a series. So that's the big thrill for many writers, is to find yourself writing a series, because you know you're going to be writing one book after another, and you have better hope that each book is going to get published. There is a lot of competition for what you write. Everybody you talk to is going to say to you, oh, I could write a book. Let me tell you my idea. And the difference between you and them is that you're going to actually write something, and they might not. But there are a lot of people who get around to writing something. And what makes a difference in terms of whether you get published is whether what you write speaks to someone else. Now, does that mean you have to be thinking about other people when you write? No. It means you have to be writing about yourself with all of your heart, whether that's disguised in another character, whether it's formalized, whether you try to keep your emotions penned up and you are very analytical and you write in that way, but you're still writing about something that matters to you. And that's what will eventually get you published, my thought. It's at least that's what has happened for me. Okay, my typical day. Because right now I want to be writing novels and I want them to have some depth to them, I have to have my mind and my spirit both really vibrant, both really energetic. And that means, oddly enough, that I have to get my body working each day. So the first thing I do when I get up, I have my own spiritual bit. You know, I say good morning to God and I say a little prayer, asking for some help during the day. Not everybody does that, but I know a lot of people who do. And I know a lot of writers who have a ritual, which is similar to that. You can create your own ritual, and it might mean turning on a light. It might mean putting your favorite piece of fabric on a surface before you sit there. It might mean sharpening the same pencil or buying the best pens. But those rituals and the spiritual component, they're not the same, but they are similar. They help prepare you. They say, I'm going to do this today. This is a hard thing, but it's going to bring me joy, and I'm going to prepare and I'm going to walk into it. Next thing I do is go for a walk. I don't always go far. Most days I try to cover 2 to 3 miles over the course of the whole day. But my morning walk might start out between half a mile and a mile and a half. I don't want to get too tired and sweaty before I sit down and write. And the next thing I do is protein. Everybody has their own food stuff, but for me, if I don't have protein in a meal, I'm not going to be functioning at my best for my body. And if my body isn't functioning, my mind can't. I mean, my brain sits inside this body. So I have to take care of my body in order to write well. So I go for a walk. have a good breakfast, do whatever kinds of rituals commit me to working hard that day, whether it's sharpening a pencil or sitting down. When you talk with famous writers who've written a lot, they will usually tease you at some point and say, you know, the biggest success rule for writing? And you say, no, what is it? And they'll say, ass in chair. Basically, you have to be sitting at your computer or wherever else you like to write, and you have to force yourself to do it. Now, force, I'm kind of putting force in quotes because sometimes it's hard to sit down when there are a dozen other things you'd like to do and you're not sure about what you're going to write today. But making yourself sit down is the first step to having something get written for most people most of the time. The exception to that is something I discovered from my poems. And that is, I discovered that when I'm walking, the metaphors that I want for my poems start pouring through my thoughts. And it can get really frustrating because I might not get home again until half an hour or longer after I start realizing them. And I found that I can take my cell phone, which always travels with me, and I can turn it on to email, and I can send an email to myself using the little microphone to record with, and I can talk a poem right into the phone as I'm going. Or I can make a list of metaphors, or I can just rattle off words that I'm thinking of that seem somehow important. Or I can say, for the story I'm writing today, or the memoir piece I'm writing today, I really want to get to this part. And that all really helps me. So it's not always being at the chair, but it's being engaged with that process of writing, whether it's on a pad or at the computer keyboard or on the phone in my case, and sometimes when I'm walking. So where are we? Spiritual, walking or other exercise, stretching, yoga, you name it, a good meal, and then getting into the writing itself. Now, if you're like me, it's tough some days. You sit down, you say, I'm going to write X, and you sit down and nothing comes. So part of my preparation for being able to do that sit down part is the night before I make myself a list. And it's usually very short. It's 3 or 4 items, but it has to do with what I want for the next day. And if I'm in the middle of a novel, it will have a twist on the next chapter for the novel, or it will have an insight on a character I've just realized. If I'm only going to do a poem first and then move on to other things, it may have the metaphor I'm working on a particular week. Sometimes I write a whole string of poetry that has to do with where the poems connect to each other. And I'll remind myself something about that. But I make myself a list, and it's a short list. I've found that long lists just sort of depress me. So a short list where I can actually check things off and say, hey, I did those 3 things. That's my idea of getting ready, and I do that the night before. So when I get to the desk, I look at that short list and I pick out something to try. Or if I've already been walking and things have been springing to mind, or I have a phone recording of metaphors that I want to play with, I go straight into that. If none of that is producing something that I'm happy or excited about, then I switch to writing to friends. Probably people tell you not to spend so much time writing to your friends. I think that's crazy, because writing to friends, if I use it for thinking about my writing, becomes a big prompt for moving into the writing of the day. Every writer I know who does a lot of writing has a network of friends that they stay in touch with, whether it's in person or in email, in a blog, Instagram. I'm not a big Instagram user yet. I'm hoping to get more so later. But I use Facebook a lot. And every day I post a few photographs of my world in Vermont. And I try to choose words to go with the photos that take me into poet mind. Deliberate words that will trigger something in the people who read them. Then it's the writing itself. For me, a good desk chair is important. I spend anywhere from 8 to 15 hours a day in that chair. Not all of it writing. A lot of it is my so-called day job work, the work that earns a reliable income, and that may be editing scientific journals or writing something for someone from another country who needs it written in good English. But I'm in the chair a lot of hours, and I try to break those hours up. I try not to sit in one place for more than 1 hour without getting up and doing something. This time of year, I go out and I weed, or I take photographs, or I just walk all the way around the house and back again. But you have to keep your body, or I've found you have to keep your body moving in order to have it respond well, in order to have your brain that sits in your body get enough oxygen and components that it functions from, so that you can think and do the brilliant work that you want to be able to do. And everybody wants to be able to do brilliant work, whether people recognize it or not. You want to keep getting better. You want to keep getting deeper. You want to keep having more fun with it. Whatever your definition is of why you want to write, you want more of it. Yes, do it. I thought I'd let you know what I've got in progress now. I have always some poems in progress. I just finished the first draft of a book that is set roughly now. It's told in 2 voices, a grandmother and her high school granddaughter. And I'm also getting ready to start the next book in my Winds of Freedom series, which the Longshadow is part of. And that will be book 3. Book 2 is already done and waiting for the publisher to get back engaged after the COVID epidemic tames a little bit. So I'm doing a lot of research for book 3. I stack up the research in files, and files on the computer and files on the table and in the desk and in the boxes. And I'm also writing a memoir. And I think that's because of the age I am. It's just a time when I realize that there are things I want to say before they're gone. I want to talk about what it was to grow up when I grew up, and the choices that I made as a young woman, romance, career, raising kids. I want to say things about that. And that wasn't really a part of my life until fairly recently. But I'm just writing it a little bit at a time. For me, that's a useful habit, to not feel like I have to write everything all at once. I write my memoir pieces on an online site called Medium. I write my short stories mostly aimed at the local paper, the Green Mountain Trading Post, or at competitions online. And I write my novels because I need to write my novels. All right, so that's what's in progress, as well as what I'm editing today, which is going to be some material for scientific authors from Korea, some material for an American Journal of Environmental Health, and what else? I think that's about what I've got on today for the technical stuff. Do I write nonfiction? Yeah. I will write historical research for the North Star Monthly, for the Northland Journal. But I just finished some for that, and I'm not ready to work on the next one. I'm just piling up research on it. So every now and then, if I need a break from the writing itself, I start doing research, mostly online these days. I mean, we are in the middle of an epidemic. But sometimes I'll go someplace. I often find that my local library can get me really interesting books that I've found references to. And I'll bring those in. And sometimes I talk with people about the research. So speaking of talking with people and memoirs, something that comes up pretty often is, if you write about your family, can they sue you? Basically, no. If you tell the truth, or if you say, this is my opinion, nobody can sue you. However, those of us who write about our families often disguise them a little bit, just because we want to be able to still talk with them later. And we don't want to have them argue with us about it. So you'll find, for instance, in the books by Reeve Lindbergh, another Northeast Kingdom author who's written a lot of memoir about her family, you'll find that she has deliberately called her work creative nonfiction. She'll give dialogue, but it's not the dialogue that she recorded. It's what she remembers as the discussion. And that gives her room to say things that somebody else might say, well, it didn't happen exactly that way. And she can say, that's all right. I'm not writing a book that's exact. It's not a reporter's record. It's my impression. So don't worry about your family suing you, but think about kindness and think about whether you'd rather use the material to write fiction from. I think that writing about our crazy families, and almost everybody has a family that's both wonderfully normal and wonderfully crazy at the same time. Writing about that can be a great place to launch for any kind of story. Pick out your favorite books in the world, line them up in front of you, and say, if I were going to write that from the person I am, what would it be like? What would be different? Okay. So another point I want to bring up is it interests me. Why doesn't it interest you? This happens a lot in early writing. It certainly happened for me. I would say, well, this is so cool. Why aren't you interested? Don't you want to publish me? I've written this. It's wonderful. And the truth is, people like to hear about themselves. It's a funny thing. So one of the tricks to getting your writing published is to help other people reading it understand that they're reading about themselves as well as you, to open it up. And part of how you do that is by caring about other people, by keeping discussions going, by having conversations, friendships. I talk with people across the world about their books. I actually review books. It's another piece of my writing life. And I do it not for money, but for the joy of helping other authors along, and also for the pleasure of reading many more books than I might otherwise get around to. And I post my book reviews online, and I'll often become friends with that author after the review is done, because I really want to keep talking about some of the things that they've brought up in their books that interest me. Two other things I want to bring up. One is it's easiest when you're starting out to begin close to yourself and work outward. Write something from your life, get it published locally. And people are always saying to writers, oh, why don't you go get that published? And it's much more complicated than that sounds. But the Green Mountain Trading Post is a wonderful publication. And so are school newspapers. So are, when you become an alumnus of a college or a high school, there are places that alumni put their material. And I find Facebook is a great place for me to put my poems in when they're in early drafts. I have a Facebook page called Beth Cannell, Vermont Writer. So start local and then work outward. And you will eventually work outward to national publication if that's what you want. I'm most interested right now in having my work be read by people in the Northeast Kingdom, people in Vermont, and people who love Vermont. But I have other work that gets read by people around the world, and I'm thrilled with that. But I know what's most important to me. Having said that, you can do exactly the opposite. You can start all the way outside and work toward yourself. You can begin with writing under a pen name so that nobody knows it's you, and you can do it for online magazines that are called zines. You can do it for other people's blogs. There are a lot of blogs that look for guest posts all the time, and you can be published there. And then you can gradually bring your writing closer to yourself if you want to. So either start close or start way far, and they're both really good places to start. They work. I think that's about all I wanted to talk about. I imagine you're going to have some questions. The one warning I wanted to pass on to you is at some point, if you decide you want to write and you want to take classes toward that and do more of it, someone is going to say to you, and it may be somebody who's really important to you, like your father, they're going to say, you can't earn a living writing. Why don't you do something else? Or why don't you put that on the side and make something else the center? Don't buy into it. If you're going to choose something else to balance with your writing, choose it because you love it. There is always a living to be had in writing if that's what you want from it. But what's more important to me is I write to live. I, I want to see my words get stronger. I want to influence other people with what I write. I want to light up magical moments for people. I want to help other people carry their joy and their sorrow. Um, that's all living to write and writing to live. It's not to make a living. It's the big joy, the big creativeness of writing, whether it's nonfiction or fiction, whether it's historical or dystopian. It's that creation, the putting something onto the paper that 5 minutes ago wasn't there. So whenever I finish the first chapter of a book that I'm writing, a novel, I take a deep breath and I stop and just enjoy it. That last week, those people didn't even exist. And today I know who they are. And for the moment, I'm the only one who knows who they are. But I'm going to share it really soon. I'm going to share it with you. Thanks for being here. Bye.